It is a Wednesday night on Mark Rogers TV. That means we're talking Alabama football with Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. So what you do each and every Wednesday night is you can catch us live right around 6:30, 6:45 Eastern time at Mark Rogers TV on YouTube. That entire discussion will post straight to YouTube at my YouTube channel at Mark Rogers TV. We also make it available on the audio side for you at iTunes and also Podbean. Just search Mark Rogers TV. You'll see Alabama football talk right there. Or if you just want to catch the individual segments and the topics that we break down, we make that a little bit more digestible in like 5 to 7 minute segments with Stephen M. Smith. Stephen, how you doing tonight?
Doing good. Voice a little bit raspy. Dealing with a little sore throat here, but you know what? It's Wednesday, and you still got to get to work.
Yeah, and you play hurt. You do that better than just about anybody. you keep the
I
fluids
appreciate
down.
that, Mark. I'm not the biggest athlete in the world, but I appreciate it.
You go with the fluids and the rest. So we don't want to hear anything about Team No Sleep tonight. You need to make an exception tonight, Stephen. Get your rest.
We'll do. We'll do that. That will be a priority.
All right, Nick Saban wants his football team to get rest, obviously, in preparation for summer camp here in August. And the latest wave of Alabama football players has hit Tuscaloosa, hit campus here in the last few days. It's the 2017 final wave of players. Who are some of the guys that may contribute, some guys that we can highlight here, Stephen?
Well, number one is going to be a freshman kicker from Louisiana, Joseph Belovis, the 3-star. A lot of people very high on him. He's 6 feet, 210 pounds. Coach Saban mentioned all spring how excited they are to have this young man come in at kicker. Belovis, who was a commitment of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets for a long time, decided to remove that commitment from Georgia Tech, give it to Alabama and Coach Saban. And for a position that, in years past, it was not really a constant issue. In years past, Alabama having guys like Philip Doyle and Scott Proctor, Peter Kim back in the 80s, Van Tiffin, of course, during the Saban era, Lee Tiffin, Jeremy Shelley. During the Mike Shula era, there was Jamie Christensen. So back then, Alabama had some consistency at that kicker spot. But in the last couple of years, starting off with the 2013 where the kick six happened, there's been some issues in the kicking game. And I remember when Adam Griffith came in 2012, the young man from Poland, adopted by parents in Calhoun, Georgia. He was supposed to be the savior of that department. ESPN that he made that amazing tear-jerking video on him. And despite the improvements that he made between his freshman and sophomore year, and then to his junior and senior year, there were still moments where you had Tide fans that cringed, Tide fans that drank to cope with their emotions every time Griffith went up there to kick the football. So having Joseph Belovis, the freshman, can he be the perennial star, is going to be the biggest question to be asked. I've got a chance to talk with a lot of former players, including ex-Alabama punter P.J. Fitzgerald. He was just telling me on yesterday that it's going to come down to, can Belovis come in with confidence, be able to know what he's supposed to do? He's not going to make every kick, but make the clutch ones, make the ones that matter, and not put so much focus on the crowd noise. Just trust your instincts, trust your teammates around you, and trust that you know what you're doing. So Joseph Belovis, to me, number one. The number two guy in the last wave of recruits, I like Henry Ruggs III, the receiver out of the Montgomery area. He reminds me a lot of Kenyon Drake, where special teams is concerned. His ability to start back up on a dime, on kick returns, punt returns, that type of ordeal. Not going to get a lot of playing time first year off at receiver because Alabama is so stacked at that spot. But on special teams, him being able to weave and bob his way, kind of like driving a stick shift, if you will. his ability to get in that first gear, switch to second gear, go to third gear, be able to stop, downshift a little bit, kick it to fifth gear, have those ways of being elusive, eluding defenders in that return game. I love that aspect of Henry Ruggs III. So I look at those two guys. If I have to bring in a third guy, I look at LeBron Ray, the defensive end commit that came in a couple of days ago for this 2017 class. Now, Isaiah Buggs, in my opinion, is going to start opposite Deshaun Hand at defensive end. But LeBron Ray is just a freak, nasty athlete. This guy is 6'3", 6'4", tremendous hands, has a burst off the line of scrimmage. I really want to see what he can do in that second group or third group of defensive linemen as far as that rotation is concerned. But LeBron Ray, Henry Ruggs III, and Joseph Belovis, the kicker, those three guys are kind of my guys I'm highlighting in this last group of talent for Alabama that's now enrolled.
Stephen Smith and myself talk Alabama football each and every Wednesday night. You can join us live as we send out the link on Twitter, or just go to MarkRogersTV every Wednesday night right around 6:45 Eastern time. We're talking Alabama football. You can see the complete conversation there. We also post it to iTunes and Podbean if you just want to hear the audio at Mark Rogers TV, or if you're just interested in individual topics, we break that down for you and make that available by Thursday at Mark Rogers TV. So, of course, Stephen, you broke down the last wave. I'm going to give you a little bit of an assignment, homework assignment for the next few weeks that you'll probably not need any homework on because you know this football team too well, but we'll probably need to look back at some point during the summer, getting us ready for August camp, and look at this 2017 class in regards to who you think can make an immediate impact, who are some sleepers, and kind of square up the class for us.
No problem at all. I'm excited to do it.
All right. The SEC coaches each and every year, right around Memorial Day, convene on Florida and get together to talk about the topics that affect the SEC in particular, but all of college football as well. Nick Saban made a comment this week about Florida State possibly being the preseason #1 team in the land. We know, regardless of what the rankings are going to be, it's going to be one of the great and much anticipated games, the anticipated game of week 1. Ed Orgeron of LSU. Of course, the Tigers have generally been the foe, the team in the way of Alabama since Nick Saban left and Les Miles took over. And that was quite a battle for a number of years. The Tide has dominated in recent years, and not necessarily on the scoreboard and crushing LSU, but being the better team and winning those battles 10-0 this past year in Baton Rouge. But Ed Orgeron knows his task and knows that the LSU faithful want to get back on top of the SEC Western Division. And if you can get on top of that division, you're playing for a college football playoff berth, of course. Orgeron making comments this week about needing to get back in the driver's seat in recruiting. Now, nothing is wrong with LSU's recruiting, typically a top 5 class in the land, but maybe that they need to reel in a couple more to get ahead of Alabama and chase down the Tide, Stephen.
I think what Orgeron was trying to say there, Mark, is keeping the in-state talent in-state. Let's make no mistake about it. Louisiana, that Texas, Louisiana area is a hotbed in recruiting. And I go back to 2009 for just a moment, remembering guys like Robbie Green and Eddie Lacy and Kenny Bell. Those were the first 3 players that from that Louisiana area, but Alabama went in, plucked them out, brought them to Alabama. Since then, we've seen Bradley Silv and Landon Collins, and Cam Robinson, and Cam Sims, just so many times since the early part of Saban in Alabama. Since then, the Crimson Tide able to go into the Bayou and take guys right out of LSU's backyard. And the fan base of the Tigers know that the quickest way to keep these guys in our backyard is to win. Kids want to go to programs that win and that win championships and that win consistently. And Ed Orgeron made a comment that that's the benchmark. You have to beat Alabama. That's the benchmark. You have to win the SEC, and you have to compete for a national championship. And one of the more crucial things for the Tigers is getting a quarterback that really forces defensive coordinators to scheme and game plan to play that type of a quarterback. The last time the Tigers had a signal caller that really struck fear in the hearts of opponents with just dynamic play was Jamarcus Russell back in the early 2000s. He was the last one, both throwing and running the football. Now, Zach Mettenberger, from a throwing standpoint, was good. You know, Matt Flynn won a national championship with the Tigers as a two-loss LSU team back in 2007. Matt Flynn was decent. You had guys like Jarrett Lee and Jordan Jefferson that were okay, but average. And then you had Ryan Perrilloux, who played with Matt Flynn, who was supposed to have been the big-time heir apparent, but Ryan Perrilloux got dismissed from the program. And then there's Anthony Jennings, and Brandon Harris that both ended up transferring. So since Jamarcus Russell, you haven't had that quarterback that made defenses go, holy cow, how are we going to defend this guy? Is there any way we can rattle this young man? There's not been a quarterback at LSU since Jamarcus Russell that has planted that thought in the minds of defensive coordinators. And until that happens, it's going to constantly be a struggle for LSU. They recruit well at running back. You saw Leonard Fournette. We've seen Spencer Ware. We've seen Charles Scott. We've seen Joseph Adai and Justin Benson and just the plethora of running backs the Tigers have brought in. We've seen them at receiver with Ernie Doucette and Dwayne Bowe, of course, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Malachi Dupree, Trayvon Durrell. Defensively, LSU keeps strong talent on the defensive line. It keeps talent at linebacker. It keeps talent in the secondary. The Tigers even find a way on special teams to get good kickers and punters, but it comes back to the quarterback, the signal caller, the one calling the shots. When will LSU get a quarterback that dominates that forces, I should say, defenders to really play that particular position? Until LSU gets that, it's going to be a struggle in the Bayou.
Stephen, you bring up 2011, or you bring up Jordan Jefferson, and I instantly go back to 2011 because we've had the discussion that season was almost the breaking point where Alabama broke away from LSU and left them in second or third place in the SEC West permanently. For several seasons there leading up to that campaign, the programs were juggernauts, step for step for the most part. And LSU wins the game in Tuscaloosa, the 9-6 game in overtime. Bama completely outclasses them 21-0 in the national championship game. For me, because of two reasons. One, because A.J. McCarron was far more the more efficient quarterback. Jordan Jefferson just did not have grasp of the offense, didn't threat the defense with a significant passing game, was too erratic throwing the ball downfield. And just the difference, for all credit given to Les Miles for inspiring football teams, getting great recruiting classes, and really developing the players for the most part in a game-for-game situation in terms of X's and O's strategy versus Nick Saban. I think it was a mismatch. You give Saban a month against Les Miles, and that was the result, 21-0. Since then, LSU is bringing in top 5 talent, but they have not been able to hang with the Tide. I haven't run the numbers, but I would guess, Stephen, that in the last, probably since Urban Meyer came to Ohio State, that Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, and LSU have a significant gap over the rest of the country in bringing in top talent. Of course, the Tide, according to most services, has brought in, 7 or 8 consecutive #1 classes. Ohio State had a class this year that could arguably be called the best in the nation. But the one distinguishing point is that Ohio State's moved on quarterbacks to the NFL. Cardell Jones and J.T. Barrett had a couple great seasons. We'll see what he does at the next level. Florida State, of course, had Jameis Winston and now DeAndre Francois. You went down the litany of quarterbacks at LSU since winning a national championship and since Jamarcus Russell was the #1 overall pick in the draft, and there just hasn't been a comparison with what the other programs have churned out just at that one position. Otherwise, LSU has been just as good as anyone, you would think. At least the recruiting rankings would tell us that going into college, and then the NFL draft picks would signify that they've been just as good as just about anybody else when the players come out the other end of the system 3 or 4 years later.
LSU has recruited well. LSU has recruited very well, and this is a program where I think the fan base is screaming, when will the recruiting classes turn in to championships? When will the recruiting classes turn into us consistently beating Alabama, consistently beating other teams in the SEC, consistently competing for national championships? Ed Ogeron knows what he's up against. Ed Ogeron knows what the task is set out in front of him. But I continue to reiterate, it starts with that quarterback. It starts with that guy who's got the confidence to not only lead a team, but also the throwing mechanics, the throwing prowess to put that team on his back. Or should he be a dual threat quarterback? The dual threat prowess to put that team on his back and carry that team to the promised land. And until that happens, or until LSU develops a scheme where it's quarterback friendly, it's going to be difficult. Because I even go back to last year, prior to Les Miles being fired, they had a 5-star receiver to come into LSU, a 5-star receiver, and he ended up transferring out of the program. And the reason why he transferred, and I quote, he transferred because the offense just wasn't open enough. The offense just was not receiver friendly enough. Guys were not getting the ball because Les Miles was so prone on running the ball with Leonard Fournette. Run the ball, Leonard Fournette. Run the ball, Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette is an incredible running back, but unless you have a passing game to really complement him, or any back for that matter, your running back's going to get banged up, bruised up going into the National Football League, because you don't have a quarterback to take some pressure off of him and force defenses to recognize, whoa, this is not one-dimensional. They got a two-dimensional system going here.
And Stephen, as we discussed before we came on, looking back at the LSU teams over the last decade, unfortunately for them, when they put together the best group of skill position players that they've had since Jamarcus Russell and that gang, it was Zach Mettenberger at quarterback. And even though he didn't threaten the defense with his legs, obviously an NFL type of passer, Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham Jr. on the outside, Jeremy Hill in the backfield, who's starting with the Cincinnati Bengals, a tremendous offensive cast. But unfortunately for Les Miles and crew in 2013, that's probably the weakest, and this is LSU week, relatively speaking, weakest core of defensive talent and offensive line talent that they've had roughly in the last decade was that particular season. I think they lost 38-17 in Tuscaloosa that particular year. One more note on LSU before we move on to another chief rival of the Tide is that I had an interview with Adrian Ely, an offensive tackle out of Louisiana. And to your point, he was down to Oklahoma and LSU because of the excitement of the Oklahoma offense. He thought he could showcase his wares as a left tackle in space in the passing attack at Oklahoma and move it on to the NFL, as opposed to grind it out at LSU and not really showcase his game for NFL scouts. So it came down to a top player at tackle choosing Oklahoma over LSU this past recruiting cycle. Auburn, Stephen, has had one of the strangest trajectories up and down over the last 7 or 8 years. They were going 8-4 quite a bit at the end of Tommy Tuberville's run. Gene Chizik took over. They were having a lot of those 7-5, 8-4 kind of seasons. They grab Cam Newton, of course. They go undefeated, win a national championship. 2 years later, they're going 0-8 in the SEC. They completely turn that around. Gus Malzahn does in year 1 of 2013 of his regime to go all the way within 13 seconds of winning a national championship against Florida State. They had all that offensive skill player talent with Trey Mason and Nick Marshall and Sammy Coates and company in place, Duke Williams, and they just couldn't put it together the next year. They had a really talented team, but go 8-5. Then the next year was the Jeremy Johnson year, and people were hyping him up as a Heisman candidate, and he was just a disaster out of the gate. And they've muddled around, the 8-5 type mark since then. That was their last season, 7-6 the year before. So Gus Malzahn possibly feeling a little heat. On the other hand, a lot of people feel really good about his football team, that he may have the quarterback in place with Baylor transfer Jarrett Stidham.
Auburn is the sexy pick to win the SEC this season, and it's because of Jarrett. The difference between Jarrett Stidham and Jeremy Johnson, Jarrett Stidham, arm-wise, can really thread the needle. This man can really throw the football. And before leaving Baylor, due to the sexual scandal that happened in the summer, Jarrett Stidham, in his 1 year backing up Seth Russell at Baylor 2015, completed over 60% of his throws for 1,265 yards, 12 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, guided that Baylor team to a 10-3 record. And during the 8A game for the Auburn Tigers, 16 for 20 passing for 267 yards. In the same manner that Cam Newton was able to put Auburn on his back, both throwing and running wise, to a national championship in the 2010 season, Stidham has the same capabilities as a passer. You look at Auburn, they've got the talent returning around him. Cam Petway, Kerryon Johnson at running back. At wide receiver, John Franklin III, Kyle Davis, Ryan Davis, Nate Craig Myers, Will Hastings, Marcus McClain, who's 6'2", 226 pounds. They've got the talent around him. The question for Auburn is, will this year's Auburn be last year's Tennessee? Because Butch Jones had the volunteer fan base hyped up, pumped up. 2016 was the best year for Tennessee to win it all. You had media pundits like Paul Feinbaum and Colin Cowherd of Fox Sports 1 saying Tennessee is a college football playoff top 4 seeded team. And talent-wise, you can see it. Joshua Dobbs at quarterback, Alvin Kamara running back, Jalen Hurd running back. At receiver, Josh Malone, Josh Smith, Juwan Jennings, Jason Kroom, tight end Ethan Wolf. The offensive line that were freshmen in 2013, Butch Jones' first year, were now juniors and seniors, so you expected more from them. On the defense, my goodness, you had Derek Barnett, Shai Tuttle, Corey Vereen, Jalen Reeves-Maben, Derek Kirkland Jr., in the secondary, Todd Kelly Jr., Cam Sutton. Just so many weapons. And the first game of the season should have lost to Appalachian State if the Mountaineers had any type of clock management. But I digress from that statement. Beat Appalachian State. You start the year off 5-0. You get the crazy Hail Mary from Dobbs to Juwan Jennings to beat Georgia. And everybody's jumping on the Butch Jones bandwagon. It's our time. Rocky Top, it's our time. You're 5-0. You go up against Kevin Sumlin, Texas A&M. You lose that game, hard-fought game. You have some players get dinged up, including Jalen Reeves-Maben, Jalen Hurd, and also Cam Sutton. And then there's the Alabama game. And despite the injuries, despite even having one of your defensive front guys, Danny O'Brien, get dismissed from the program, people still go, Jalen Hurts young, Jalen Hurts a baby, he's just a freshman, he's not going to be used to the adversity and the raucous crowd at Neyland Stadium. And the baby Jalen Hurts runs for 132 yards and 3 touchdowns against Tennessee. Joshua Dobbs gets pummeled by Jonathan Allen and Tim Williams and Ryan Anderson and Reuben Foster and the rest of the Alabama defense. Alabama didn't really have to pass the ball in that game. Of its 594 total yards, 409 of those were on the ground in a 49-10 beat down of LSU. Not LSU, Tennessee. Then the Volunteers lose to Coach Will Boom Muschamp, Jake Bentley in South Carolina, and then have the life championship stripped from it by Vanderbilt. Let's make a long story short. You start off 5-0. You lose 4 of your next 8 games to limp to 9-4. And the team that was supposed to have everything to win it all, Butch Jones' hot seat is even more hotter because next year you got to try to replenish all that talent, and it's going to be difficult. So we look at Auburn in the same boat. It's got the talent to really be something this season. even with no Montravius Adams, no Carl Lawson. The question is, will Auburn be able to maximize that talent? And will Jarrett Stidham be able to perform under the pressure? There's a lot of pressure on Stidham. If he struggles in just the slightest matter, we're looking at Gus Malzahn out of a job, because the Tiger fans are restless. They want to know, have not had a 10-win season since 2013. When are we going to compete for a national championship and a conference title? They've got the quarterback to do it, but there's a strange illusion that this year's Auburn could be last year's Tennessee and fall on its face.
Yeah, you mentioned two big defensive losses across the defensive line, and even though Carl Lawson couldn't stay on the field, he was one of the premier players in the country at his position when he was on the field. Dontravius Russell does come back, and he's the linchpin up front. Byron Cowart, #1 rated player coming out of high school a couple years ago. He's been decent, but not been a game-changing type of player. They need him to fulfill his potential. They have two of the fine defensive backs in the conference, in Trey Matthews at safety and Carlton Davis, maybe the finest corner in the conference, certainly in that top 3 to 4 range. Shameless plug, our top 5 SEC cornerbacks, Stephen and I and a number of other contributors talked about just a few nights ago as well. So that's the deal with the Auburn Tigers. It'll be fun kicking around some of the top teams in the SEC over the next couple months, getting everybody set for 2017. So it's Stephen M. Smith and myself getting together every Wednesday night to talk Alabama football. We invite you to join us live. We will send out the link on Twitter right around 6:30, 6:45 Eastern time. You catch the full conversation, also the audio versions available on iTunes and at Podbean at MarkRogersTV. Or if you just want to check out one individual segment, one topic, let's say we're talking quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, and you just want to hear Stephen wax poetic about the wide receivers, hey, we make that available in a small slice right there at Mark Rogers TV as well. Stephen, we appreciate you gutting it out for us tonight.
No problem, Mark. I'm not Shakespeare, but hey, let's get it done. Thank you.